Welcome to the HackerRank podcast. This episode, we're sharing a chat I had with Michael Glukhovsky, Developer Relations at Stripe, from our HackerRank main event in San Francisco. Michael shares the principles behind Stripe's successful developer brand and how this translates into their recruiting process. I'd love to maybe have you introduce your role at Stripe and get started with that.
Yeah, sounds great. So I work at Stripe as a developer advocate on the developer relations team. I'll give a little context on what that role looks like in a moment. But prior to Stripe, I was the founder of a developer tools company building an open source database called RethinkDB. So I've been doing developer tools for most of my career. In my role at Stripe today, our goal is essentially to reach out to the broad base of developers who use our platform. Stripe builds economic infrastructure. So the simplest version is we accept online payments, but you basically can use our API platform to be able to help build your online business and then scale it globally. And so what we do is we try to find all of the touch points and friction across the product and platform for developers, and then advocate externally and internally to reduce friction and improve velocity. So we spend a lot of time thinking about developer mindset and a lot of time thinking about what developers need.
So Stripe has one of the most respected developer brands, really great about it. Are there specific principles or philosophies that you guys followed that helped you get there? Of course, one of them is obviously the core is API.
Yeah.
So that should by default attract developers, but I'm pretty sure there are a lot of API companies who don't have a brand like Stripe. What are some of the principles that you started to work on?
Since joining Stripe 2 years ago, I've shifted from working on a database that's in software you download and install and run on your machine to an API platform. And it's a very different experience because APIs, they represent the world around us. Essentially, the way that people approach APIs today, effective companies building API platforms, is, traditionally companies would sign paper contracts with each other, negotiate the terms of how to work with your service partner. We have to do it all by hand. It's all negotiation, one-off for each individual partner. With an API platform, the terms are pre-negotiated. And then you can just transact freely, and access to the platform is democratized. So it's economic infrastructure that allows anyone to get started very quickly. And if you think about developer mindset, one of the things that people don't often understand if they're not a developer themselves is a lot of folks focus on the tools, what languages do you know? Or what frameworks do you use? And they assume that that's the thing that developers really care about. But the truth is that'd be a lot like asking a potter, do you like potter's wheels? Do you want to work at my company? We have a kiln. And the truth is that no, it's about the art. What are you trying to create? What's the thing you're actually trying to build? And so when you have an API platform that sort of represents the world around you, it has to be well-defined, it has to be consistent, and it has to allow you to express your ideas effectively. Software is really just a vehicle for ideas. And so when it comes to Stripe, a couple things that we did differently. One is that the API is consistent, it's backwards compatible, so as we update it, you don't have to change anything into your software, it just keeps working. If your API platform breaks due to a version upgrade, that amounts to a contract renegotiation. And that's an opportunity for developers to leave your API platform. And so we really try to respect this living contract with our users to understand that if they're going to be building their business and using our APIs to power their business process, then we need to make sure that it doesn't just abruptly change in them day to day. The other thing is that when you look at traditional payments companies, roll back 10 years, I myself actually with Rethink, I tried to set up a merchant account to be able to do payments. And it was just a laborious, crazy process because you have to fill out contracts like this, sign with each individual partner like Visa and MasterCard. It takes weeks to approve you. That isn't very good from a developer perspective because developers really value load time to dopamine. Just get that rush of oh, it works. Oh man, what did I just do? I just made a payment. I just accepted someone's payment online. That's a pretty rewarding experience. And so unlike companies that traditionally would ask for a lot of details about your business to ensure that they can accept you on their platform, Stripe has instant onboarding. So you just get started, you sign up for an account, and you can just start using it. You can start building with it. And there's documentation to help you along the way, very clearly defined, and tools to help you see what's happening in every part of the API platform. This approach towards thinking about it as a relationship that needs to be fostered and helping developers express themselves well is probably some of the driving forces behind Stripe's success.
And how does this translate into your recruiting process in terms of, you talked about it should be agnostic of a language or a framework. Do you actually extend this principle or philosophy even during your recruiting process? I've looked at your guides of how you help prepare candidates, but we'd love to know how does this extend to recruiting?
Absolutely. So there's a couple things that I've seen companies make mistakes of, peers with startups who would try to hire teams. And one is treating the interview process as a confrontational puzzle to solve. Because sometimes the director of engineering will be I'm going to really stump the candidate. I know what I'll tell them. And that's actually not how they're going to be working in your role, presumably. And so we try to give candidates the absolute best possible chance for success. We have lots of guides that prepare them for the actual day and what kind of problems they'll be working on. But when it comes to like software development, a lot of people assume that, there is deep specialization within programming languages. But the best programmers, they can move from language to language and learn a new one within a few weeks if they need to. The basic principles translate for the most part. And as long as someone is like a sophisticated, thoughtful engineer, it shouldn't matter what language they come in the door with. The question is, can they do the work well? And are they a good person to work with? It's like really just that simple. And so we have very defined processes for different questions we ask. And then we always try to have software development tools available for them that they can just download and install for all of the major languages. If we don't have that, we chat with the candidate beforehand and see if we can figure out an option that will work. And we try to really help them use their own laptop when they come in and not too much whiteboard activities. Sometimes a whiteboard activity can be nice, but the truth is that the goal is to understand how someone thinks. And if you're creating friction for them because it's not the way they normally would work, I don't know many programmers who program on a whiteboard, it can be counterproductive.
Yeah, so that's been an interesting debate, which is what I want to touch on. So even Stripe does a lot of lower level things on like infrastructure and payment infrastructure is pretty hard. Do you say, hey, for these roles, it's okay to use them? Do you have a rubric defined for each of those roles? How do you actually standardize?
There are always rubrics. Always, always, always.
Can you give it like a sample?
Yeah,
or like
so one that I run for my team, so developer advocates, it's kind of like a interesting position because it's very left brain, right brain. You have to be good at the engineering and the building the technology and also at the storytelling and the communication of it. And so my favorite exercise when I built my developer advocacy team at Rethink, because we had this sort of grassroots open source evangelism process. Yeah. At Stripe, we've done the same thing. One of the best parts is a take-home exercise. So we just say, hey, here's the prompt. It's build a simple web app. And we give them very clearly defined terms and say, use this API to build it. And we leave it very open-ended. And we say, we expect that you will take roughly 3 hours to work on this. Like, please don't spend a lot more time than that. So that people don't commit too much to like building for like a day and a half and, it's early in the interview process. People will sometimes be a little bit confounded by the open-ended nature of the problem, but that's the point, is that in this role, you're supposed to be able to figure out, like, what are the needs of the audience, define your audience, define the story, build the software. And then we have a rubric that grades them on like 5 or 6 categories and just identifies, how do they do on documentation, on like the number of bugs in the app, like things like this. And then we look at the grades, and the thing is, consistency in a recruiting process is critical. Sometimes what happens is that you end up with getting excited about a candidate, but now you've introduced bias. And it makes it very hard to be able to scale a recruiting process if you don't have rubrics defined. So we're extremely precise about the rubric, and then we will go back and we will actually have a candidate review process where we look at the candidates who maybe didn't pass our interviews, either on-site or before coming in, and we say, why didn't they pass? What could we have done to improve the process to actually expose the weaknesses of our recruiting processes? And so it's this endless cycle where we're looking constantly at how to measure and then how do we actually perform against the measurement. That's what's allowed a really scalable recruiting process for Stripe.
Just extending that a bit further, do you think we could get to a point where you don't need to do technical interviews?
No.
Why? What's the signal do you think you're getting?
The signal is...
I'm just talking purely technical.
Absolutely.
Like, can you and I work together well? Yeah. That is super hard to figure it out. I can probably write an essay. Yeah, I think we'll work together well, but that's not going to help. But just on the hard technical skills.
Yeah, so, sometimes you could look at someone's body of work and say, this is an excellent developer. And then they come in and they do an on-site process, and then they don't do well. And then you have to ask, what happened? Clearly they're a good developer. Maybe they don't perform well within this sort of narrow window, or maybe they got stressed because there was someone else in the room. And that's why, for example, like a take-home exercise for me is like really great as an early litmus test, because it allows them to like be as comfortable as possible in their own environment before doing an on-site interview. But the truth is that just like you want to find out how someone, like the human part, we were just talking earlier about how humans will not go away. AI will not replace us. That you need to have that sort of face-to-face communication. There's something else about seeing how someone structures their ideas and builds it, and then takes that abstract concept and then turns it into code in front of you. And it's not just about like sitting and like staring at them with like a timer and being like, you got to get it done. You have 5 minutes left, pencils down. Sometimes the best interviews can be about actually just conversationally talking to them as they code and like discussing like what, maybe this doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Let's do it together. And so one exercise we have is pair programming, where we will assign an experienced Stripe engineer with a candidate. And if they run into a problem, it's not an issue. That's how software development works. What's the first thing everyone does when they have a problem is they go to Google and they're like, well, what's going on? And so, while we want to emphasize that in an interview setting, like you have to have some latitude for the process. And the goal is just to see like, can we build things together?
Yeah. The reason I ask that is I tell this even when during our team meetings or recruiting. I think it's very similar to what you touched on. Hey, can we identify the best version of this candidate?
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah.
Like that should be, in my view, that should be the principle of what's the best version look like, because everybody has weakness. We mentioned everybody's a human here. Nobody's an AI robot. And it's very easy during a debrief to say, oh, this person didn't do well in this, so we're going to like not hire or make an offer.
That's a very safe position to take.
Yeah. And you will be right. You can debate on that. Oh yeah, I mean, this person has a weakness, and like rubrics help. But at a high level, if you think about, if you want to get the best version of the candidate, then how do you make the environment of the interview less intimidating? And less intimidating is whatever is the most comfortable for you is like, give me as much time, give me a real world problem. I'll work in my environment. I'll showcase my code. But the moment you come and start doing an interview with a Stripe engineer,
it's intimidating.
Yeah, it is. How do you balance that? I mean, there's going to be definitely a bias there. I mean, there are pros and cons in every aspect. I'm pushing you more on that.
Yeah, I think that one of the failure modes for recruiting teams can be to turn it into an adversarial process. A recruiter should be an advocate for the candidate. They brought them in. They believe in the candidate. So if that's the case, then if we're not giving them the best possible chance of success, that means the recruiting operation isn't working. Right? It means that we're not respecting the candidate. And so you really have to like work to be there for all of their questions. And it's not just about like what will the interview be like or what should I expect? Like on the day of, having someone who's a really friendly, warm face who can be like, hey, I'm going to take you to your room. How was your day? How was your week? Like, let's talk for a bit. Let's just like reduce the friction of just walking in cold and feeling judged. I find sometimes that with candidates, because I often was like the people check. I would come in and talk to a developer and just ask them about something they've built and ask them to explain to me. And I would just like kind of try to understand like, what is this person like to work with? I always found, and I still find this today when I do these interviews, is that it helps to be vulnerable yourself in the interview. Because if you express your own vulnerability, someone else feels comfortable doing the same. And that seems like a very odd thing to do in an interview setting. If you remove the pressure from the situation, it makes it more fun to interview people. And it makes like for a really positive process. In fact, we find that an extraordinary number of people who we turn away refer their friends to come interview at Stripe. And I think that's a metric to pay attention to, is how many referrals are coming from the people that you rejected.
If you think about the broad applications, like when you're like a full stack developer building like a web app and things on those lines, do you believe that there needs to be a level of understanding of these fundamental concepts? And how far do you take it? Would you still reject if I'm unable to reverse a linked list at Stripe for a front-end developer, let's say? You're not going to use linked lists on a day-to-day basis, but let's say you're not able to reverse. Would you say no, or would you give them another chance?
For a front-end developer, I would look more to their ability to like effectively build on the front end. That's not a question I would ask a front-end developer. It's very important to like tailor your process to the role. Yeah. Full-stack developers are kind of like a little of a unique animal in that respect, which is why they're considered to be unicorns, is that you have to be good in a bunch of different respects. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. If you want to build your team, there's a couple ways to build a team. You can build it so that you have lots of different people who are specialists, and then you can have order of magnitude generalists. And it's really more a question of what's right for your company. Every company is unique. It's kind of like, I think it's like Tolstoy, which is like every happy family is alike in the same way. Every unhappy family is unique in its own way. And it's the same thing with companies in that like every company is like absolutely unique. And so you have to figure out like, do I want to build a team of specialists who all have like really good communication skills? Because that's going to be critical if you have a lot of different people talking to each other. Or do I want to hire these like order of magnitude individuals who will be harder to find, will have to be compensated more? You have like this question of like, it's kind of a grim term, which often comes in software development, but there's like the bus factor, which is how many people for your team would you be able to remove exactly, and still be able to continue if something really, really horrible happened. And so the point is that if you want to build your team so that you have more like redundancy and that people don't have to feel like they're the only ones able to get over the line, sometimes it helps to build a team of different skills.
Yeah, got it. So we just have like a minute.
Okay.
Any closing thoughts on how do you align recruiting and hiring managers, aligning on skills, expectations, the general relationship? How do you strengthen that?
For me, like recruiting is fundamental engine for companies. If you're not bringing in candidates, it's very hard to be able to accomplish your goals. There was a study that Stripe recently funded, which is called the developer coefficient, which showed that it is the limiting factor for companies trying to like build new projects and products, is hiring developers. Granted, there's not necessarily a talent shortage, but it is the limiting factor. And so I think that immense communication between recruiters and engineering managers to be ruthless about tracking metrics and figuring out exactly when you're deviating from, is your rubric good? Are you getting referrals? Are you bringing in the candidates? The metrics that I came with personally was, at my startup, was 100 candidates, 10 that you do a phone screen, 3 that you bring on site, and 1 person you hire. And the better that you can make those numbers, meaning the better your process is, the more efficient and effective your company is going to be, and that's going to drive that engine to be able to actually accomplish your team goals and plans.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming. Great seeing you again.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, tweet us at HackerRank.